counterintuitive truths are often the hardest to accept. One of those truths is that cutting toxic people out of your life is not always the power move people think it is. The common advice is simple: block them, delete them, walk away. End the connection and never look back. It sounds strong, it sounds decisive, it sounds like the perfect solution. But beneath the surface, a different reality is often hiding. Many toxic people are prepared for confrontation. They are prepared for emotional reactions. They are even prepared for dramatic exits. What they are not prepared for is losing the rewards that kept them attached to you in the first place. That is where the real shift begins. That is where the balance of power quietly changes. Emotional pain pushes people toward drastic decisions. After weeks, months, or even years of manipulation, guilt, criticism, mind games, and emotional exhaustion, the desire to cut someone off can feel completely justified. You want relief, you want peace, you want distance from the stress. But there is a hidden lesson that many people discover too late. Toxic individuals rarely stay connected because of loyalty alone. In many cases, they stay because they are receiving something valuable. Your attention, your patience, your forgiveness, your emotional energy. Your willingness to keep giving even when very little is returned. And the moment those benefits begin to disappear, their behavior starts to change. The masks begin to slip. The reactions become more revealing. The patterns become impossible to ignore. Suddenly, you are no longer looking at the version of them they wanted you to see. You are seeing the version that emerges when they stop getting what they want. This is where things become fascinating. Human behavior follows patterns that most people never notice. Some relationships survive challenges and become stronger. Others fall apart the moment healthy boundaries appear. Some people respect your growth. Others become uncomfortable when they can no longer control your reactions. The difference between those two groups can tell you more about a relationship than years of conversations ever could. And that is exactly what we are going to explore today. By the end of this video, you will understand why certain toxic people leave on their own, why boundaries are often more powerful than arguments, why emotional detachment can reveal hidden motives, and how a simple shift in your behavior can expose truths that have been hidden for years. Most importantly, you will learn why protecting your peace does not always require a dramatic ending. Sometimes it requires removing the rewards that keep unhealthy dynamics alive. Make sure you stay until the end, because the final lesson is the one most people never learn until after they have been hurt repeatedly by the same type of person. It could completely change the way you view toxic relationships, personal boundaries, and emotional freedom. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy exploring human behavior, psychology, relationships, and the hidden forces that shape our lives, subscribe now and join us for more deep insights in every video. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with toxic individuals is believing that conflict is the source of their power. In reality, the source of their power is often your reaction. Toxic people learn very quickly what affects you. They notice what makes you angry. They notice what makes you defensive. They notice what makes you explain yourself for the 10th time, even when you have already made your position clear. Every reaction gives them information. Every emotional response tells them where your attention is focused and how much influence they still have over your emotional state. This is why many toxic relationships follow the same pattern over and over again. A person says something hurtful. An argument follows. Feelings get hurt. Promises are made. The situation calms down. Then the cycle repeats. From the outside, it can look irrational. It can look exhausting. Yet these patterns survive because they are being rewarded. Attention itself is a reward. Human beings are naturally drawn toward attention. Even negative attention can feel valuable when someone is deeply insecure or highly controlling. If a person can disrupt your peace with a single comment and keep you thinking about them for hours, they know they still occupy space in your mind. For many toxic individuals, that knowledge feels rewarding. Emotional responses can become an even greater reward. Some people develop a strong attachment to being able to influence the emotions of others. They enjoy knowing they can trigger anger, guilt, fear, confusion, or self-doubt whenever they choose. This does not always happen in obvious ways. Sometimes it appears through subtle criticism, sometimes through guilt trips, sometimes through passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern, sometimes through constant complaints that force you into the role of emotional caretaker. The methods may change, but the outcome remains the same. They receive emotional engagement. They receive proof that they can still pull your attention toward them whenever they want. Over time, this can create a hidden dependency. The toxic person becomes attached to the emotional access they have. They become attached to knowing that their words still create movement inside your mind. Constant availability can also become a reward. Many people never realize how much of themselves they are giving away. They answer every message immediately. They solve every problem. They listen to every complaint. They make themselves available during every crisis. They become the person who is always there, always understanding, always patient. At first, this can feel generous. It can feel like kindness. But in unhealthy relationships, constant availability often becomes expected rather than appreciated. What was once received as a gift slowly becomes viewed as an obligation. The toxic person begins assuming that your time belongs to them, your energy belongs to them, your emotional resources belong to them. The moment you become less available, they react as though something valuable has been taken away from them. This explains why many toxic individuals become increasingly frustrated when they stop receiving emotional reactions. The frustration is not always about the issue being discussed. It is often about losing influence. If someone is used to provoking you and suddenly receives calm silence instead, the dynamic changes. If someone is used to making you defend yourself and suddenly you refuse to engage, the dynamic changes. If someone is used to controlling your emotional state and suddenly discovers they can no longer do it, the dynamic changes. The shift can be subtle at first. They may push harder. They may become more dramatic. They may increase the pressure. They may look for new ways to get the same response they once received easily. What they are really testing is whether their influence still exists. Many people misunderstand this stage. They think the toxic person's behavior is getting worse for no reason. In reality, unhealthy patterns often become more visible when they stop working. A person who is accustomed to control rarely gives it up willingly. They often reveal more of their true character when their usual methods lose effectiveness. The anger becomes more obvious. The guilt trips become more frequent. The manipulation becomes easier to recognize. It is almost as if the mask begins slipping because the old strategies no longer produce the same results. This is why emotional detachment can feel so powerful. It removes the fuel that keeps the cycle alive. It creates a situation where the toxic person must either adapt or expose themselves. Yet reactions are not the only thing keeping toxic people attached. Many people assume that the solution is immediate separation. The reasoning seems logical. If someone causes pain, remove them from your life. If someone behaves badly, cut them off. If someone is toxic, end all contact and move on. Sometimes that approach is necessary. Some situations absolutely require distance and protection. But there are also situations where immediate cutoffs create unexpected outcomes that many people never see coming. The moment the relationship ends abruptly, the entire story becomes easier to rewrite. Facts become blurred. Responsibility becomes harder to identify. The focus shifts away from behavior and moves toward the dramatic ending itself. This is one reason why toxic people often benefit from sudden emotional exits. They gain a new narrative. Instead of discussing the actions that damaged the relationship, attention shifts toward the reaction that ended it. The conversation becomes centered on the cutoff rather than the behavior that led to it. This creates an opportunity for the toxic person to present themselves as the injured party. They tell others that they were abandoned. They tell others they were treated unfairly. They tell others they never saw it coming. The details that caused the conflict gradually disappear from the story. What remains is a simplified version that protects their image. Human beings naturally want to see themselves as good people. Admitting harmful behavior is uncomfortable. Taking responsibility requires honesty and self-awareness. Many toxic individuals avoid this discomfort by rewriting events in a way that favors them. This process can happen so thoroughly that they begin believing their own version of the story. The mind is surprisingly skilled at protecting itself from guilt. Instead of asking what they did wrong, they focus on how they were affected. Instead of examining their behavior, they examine your reaction. Instead of acknowledging years of manipulation, they point toward the moment you finally had enough. This is why so many people feel confused after ending toxic relationships. They expect the other person to understand why the relationship ended. They expect accountability. They expect reflection. Instead, they encounter denial, blame, and distorted narratives. The toxic person tells friends and family a different version of events. They remove important context. They leave out key details. They highlight your response while ignoring their behavior. Suddenly, the discussion is no longer about what happened over months or years. It becomes about a single dramatic moment. The strange part is that this pattern often reveals how little accountability existed from the beginning. Healthy people may not like boundaries. They may not enjoy criticism, but they can usually reflect on their actions. They can acknowledge mistakes. They can recognize their contribution to a problem. Toxic individuals frequently struggle with this process because accountability threatens the image they have built for themselves. Accepting responsibility would require confronting uncomfortable truths. Blaming others feels easier. Rewriting the story feels easier. Positioning themselves as the victim feels easier. This is where a quieter strategy begins to reveal its strength. Instead of focusing entirely on removing the person, the focus shifts toward removing the benefits they receive from unhealthy behavior. This is where boundaries become incredibly important. Boundaries are often misunderstood. Many people think boundaries are about controlling others. They are not. Boundaries are about controlling your own participation. They are decisions about what you will tolerate, what you will accept, and where your responsibility ends. They are not punishments. They are not attacks. They are not attempts to change another person. They are simply limits that protect your well-being. One of the most powerful boundaries involves stopping the habit of over-explaining. Many kind and empathetic people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to justify themselves. They explain every decision. They explain every feeling. They explain every boundary. They explain every concern. They believe that if they can just find the perfect words, the other person will finally understand. But toxic individuals often use these explanations as opportunities for debate. Every explanation becomes another doorway into an argument. Every justification becomes another chance to challenge your perspective. Eventually, you find yourself trapped in endless conversations that never lead anywhere. When you stop over-explaining, the dynamic begins to shift. A simple decision remains a simple decision. A boundary remains a boundary. You no longer feel obligated to defend every choice you make. This can be deeply uncomfortable for someone who benefited from your constant need for approval. They become frustrated because the discussion they expected never arrives. Another powerful change happens when you stop rescuing people from the consequences of their own actions. Many toxic relationships survive because one person constantly absorbs responsibilities that belong to someone else. They solve problems that were never theirs to solve. They clean up messes they did not create. They carry emotional burdens that do not belong to them. Over time, this creates an unhealthy imbalance. One person gives, the other person takes. The pattern becomes so normal that neither side questions it anymore. The moment you stop rescuing, reality begins doing its own work. The consequences that were once hidden become visible. The responsibilities that were once avoided become unavoidable. This can create significant discomfort for the person who depended on your endless support. Not because you harmed them, not because you became cruel, simply because you stopped protecting them from outcomes that belonged to them all along. The same principle applies when you stop fixing every problem. Some people spend years trying to repair relationships that only one side is working to save. They become counselors, mediators, problem solvers, and emotional caretakers. They carry the relationship on their shoulders while the other person contributes very little. The effort becomes exhausting. Yet they continue because they fear what will happen if they stop. Eventually, a realization emerges. A relationship cannot be sustained by one person forever. At some point, the other person must participate. At some point, the other person must take responsibility. At some point, the burden must be shared. When you stop fixing everything, you create space for that reality to appear. Perhaps the most difficult boundary of all is refusing to sacrifice your peace in order to maintain someone else's comfort. Many people become trapped in toxic relationships because they are afraid of disappointing others. They tolerate disrespect to avoid conflict. They suppress their needs to keep everyone happy. They remain silent when they should speak. They stay available when they desperately need rest. They slowly abandon themselves in the process. The moment that changes, resistance often appears. Healthy people adjust. They respect limits. They recognize that boundaries are normal parts of healthy relationships. Toxic people frequently respond differently. They become irritated. They become demanding. They become critical. They push against the boundary because they benefited from its absence. They are not reacting to the boundary itself. They are reacting to the loss of access, control, and convenience that the lack of boundaries once provided. And it is within that resistance that their true motives begin to reveal themselves. The most powerful change in any toxic relationship does not happen when you force another person to change. It happens when you become a different version of yourself. This is the point many people overlook. They spend years trying to convince toxic individuals to behave differently. They search for better explanations, better arguments, better timing, better ways to be understood. They believe that if they can just find the right words, the relationship will finally become healthy. But toxic dynamics are rarely sustained because of a lack of communication. In many cases, they are sustained because one person continues participating in a pattern that no longer serves them. The moment that participation changes, the entire relationship begins to shift. One of the first changes is becoming less available. This does not mean becoming cruel. It does not mean ignoring everyone. It simply means recognizing that your time has value. Many people trapped in toxic relationships have spent years making themselves available at all hours. They answer every call. They respond to every message. They drop their own priorities whenever someone demands attention. They become so focused on meeting the needs of others that they slowly lose touch with their own needs. The toxic person becomes accustomed to this level of access. It feels normal to them. They expect immediate responses. They expect unlimited patience. They expect your schedule to adjust around theirs. Then something changes. You stop responding instantly. You stop rearranging your life to solve every problem. You stop abandoning your own priorities whenever someone creates a crisis. You begin protecting your time. You begin respecting your energy. You begin recognizing that constant availability is not the same thing as kindness. At first, this may seem like a small adjustment. Yet for someone who benefited from unlimited access to you, it feels enormous. The relationship begins to feel different because the rules have changed. The access they once enjoyed no longer exists in the same way. Another important shift happens when you become less reactive. Toxic people often depend on predictable emotional responses. They know exactly which buttons to press. They know which comments create guilt. They know which criticisms create self-doubt. They know which behaviors create frustration. For years, they may have relied on these reactions without even thinking about it. The cycle becomes automatic. They say something, you react, they gain influence. The pattern repeats. Then one day, the reaction they expect never arrives. The criticism receives calm silence. The guilt trip receives no emotional response. The manipulation receives a boundary instead of an argument. Suddenly, they find themselves interacting with a version of you they do not recognize. This can be deeply unsettling for a person who is used to controlling emotional outcomes. They may push harder. They may become more dramatic. They may attempt new strategies. What they are really doing is searching for the old version of you. They are searching for the predictable reaction that once reassured them they still had influence. Many people mistake emotional control for emotional suppression. The two are very different. Suppression means burying emotions while they continue causing damage beneath the surface. Emotional control means recognizing your feelings without allowing them to dictate every action. It means refusing to give away your peace simply because someone wants a reaction. This skill changes relationships in powerful ways. Toxic individuals often lose interest when they can no longer create emotional chaos. Their influence weakens because their favorite tools stop producing results. At the same time, you become less controllable. This may be one of the most uncomfortable transitions of all. For years, you may have been guided by guilt. You may have felt responsible for fixing every problem. You may have carried emotional burdens that belonged to someone else. You may have tolerated disrespect because you feared disappointing people. These patterns create opportunities for manipulation. The toxic person learns that certain emotions can be used to influence your decisions. They learn that guilt makes you say yes. They learn that fear makes you stay silent. They learn that obligation makes you sacrifice your own needs. The moment you begin questioning these patterns, everything changes. You stop making decisions based entirely on how someone else feels. You stop assuming responsibility for emotions you did not create. You stop allowing guilt to determine your choices. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you start caring about yourself as well. The toxic person often interprets this shift as selfishness because they benefited from your lack of boundaries. In reality, it is the beginning of self-respect. Self-respect is often misunderstood. Many people think self-respect is loud. They think it requires confrontation. They think it requires dramatic speeches and powerful declarations. More often, self-respect appears in quiet decisions. It appears when you say no without apologizing for existing. It appears when you refuse to participate in conversations designed to manipulate you. It appears when you stop abandoning your values to keep other people comfortable. It appears when you recognize that your peace deserves protection. This version of you feels unfamiliar to people who were comfortable with the old version. They may accuse you of changing. In many ways, they are correct. You are changing. You are becoming someone who values their own well-being. You are becoming someone who recognizes unhealthy patterns. You are becoming someone who no longer measures their worth through endless sacrifice. The relationship begins to change, not because you attacked anyone, not because you started a war, not because you became hostile, but because your participation changed. You stopped playing a role that was keeping the unhealthy dynamic alive. This is often the stage where frustration begins to appear. The toxic person senses that something is different. Their usual methods are no longer producing the same results. The conversations feel different. The emotional responses feel different. The level of access feels different. They may not fully understand what has changed, but they can feel the shift. Frustration grows because control is becoming more difficult. What makes this stage so revealing is that frustration often exposes what words were hiding. People can maintain a mask when everything is going their